Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This morning, we're going to continue our reading and discussion of this book, The Global Vatican, by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney. It's an inside look at the Catholic Church, world politics, and the extraordinary relationship between the United States and the Holy See. I would call it a diabolical relationship between the United States and the so-called Holy See, which is nothing but the seat of Antichrist. Now, for those who embrace the Protestant view of the Bible and the Protestant view of history, you'll find my commentary on this book very revealing. If you are not a Protestant, you will be doubtful, if not outraged, by my comments, but we will continue to read the book and discuss it, and wherever the chips fall, let them fall. Last time we continued our discussion about the United States and the Holy See's joint involvement in South and Central America, particularly in Venezuela, and Hugo Chavez. And we'll begin by retreating to the beginning of the paragraph that we concluded with last week. If you're following along in your own copy of the book, we're on page 186. That's 186, the first full paragraph near the middle of the page. He says, we reinforced this message a few weeks after Tom Shannon's visit on February 21st, when Kathleen and I hosted a Bon Voyage dinner at Villa Richardson for Archbishop Pietro Sambi. Archbishop Sambi, not to be confused with Archbishop Sandri, the Sostituto, was about to move to Washington to become the new papal nuncio to the United States. That's right, the papal nuncio is a direct representative of the so-called Holy See to the United States government. The beast rules over the kings of the earth, and this is how it's done. It says our guest list was composed of high-ranking members of the Curia and some other Holy See ambassadors. Dinners like these were excellent venues for relationship development. At the very least, a room full of experienced curial officials yields a high level of conversation, intellectual stimulation, and valuable insights. In part because of the guest list, the conversation veered toward Latin America and presented another chance to express our hope that the Vatican would take a firmer diplomatic stand in the region. Archbishop Sambi's previous post had been Israel, but he knew Latin America well, having launched his diplomatic career in the nunciatures in Cuba and Nicaragua. Before we sat down to dinner, I suggested to Archbishop Sambi that the Church's position on Chavez would probably be the first thing President Bush asked him about when they met for his credentialing in Washington. Sure enough, a few days later, it was. The nuncio appreciated well the danger of Chavez, but he and others at the dinner echoed the cautious tone with which Archbishop Sandri had spoken earlier to the Vatican leader. They doubted the Church could or would become too involved in trying to temper him, that is, Hugo Chavez. Now, I just want to stop and comment. Hugo Chavez was Roman Catholic. He took his orders from the Pope just like the President of the United States takes his orders. And if Chavez became a detriment to human rights in Venezuela, it was at the behest of the papacy in order to justify more papal and more U.S. government influence in the region. You see, South and Central America were left-leaning, becoming more socialist, and there were theologies such as liberation theology that tended to shift focus away from papal power and granting Roman Catholic Church independence from Rome. And this is a grave situation for the Vatican. If the Vatican is going to continue having as much control in South Central America and Mexico as it is as it has enjoyed in the past, papal power must be restored. Okay, that's the influence of the United States. And Chavez is just a puppet on the end of the Pope's arm and creating a need for more papal involvement, more U.S. papal involvement in South and Central America. Now he says, as my now WikiLeaks cable later states, quote, we see no likelihood in a change in the Holy See's official and cautious position with regard to Venezuela, unquote. The Holy See is constitutionally averse to political confrontation when it can avoid it on the grounds that it can backfire and make matters worse rather than better. So, again, the papacy is taking a public position of caution and hands-off of a situation that it created. And that calls for more U.S. involvement. The United States is going to get involved. The right arm of the papacy, the great crusader, the great papal crusader, the United States Diplomatic Corps, is going to get involved, taking the heat off of the papacy. All right. It says the Holy See is constitutionally averse to political confrontation. Listen, political confrontation literally defines the history of the papacy. Anybody who's done any research and any research at all of the history realizes that the Vatican is first and foremost a political institution, and it cloaks its efforts, its political efforts, behind religion. And let me just categorically state this. From Rome's point of view, all of its political machinations and political intrigue and political involvement throughout the world has a religious end. Okay? Politics is just a means to achieve a religious end. And what is that religious end? That all religions of the world ultimately must obey the Pope. This is how every human creature is brought into subjection to the Roman Pontiff. All right? It says the Holy See's official and cautious position, that's its public position, with regard to Venezuela, is hands off. Okay? We don't want this thing to backfire on the Holy See. So we'll use the United States of America and other national pressures against Hugo Chavez. It says the Holy See is constitutionally averse to political confrontation when it can avoid it, on the grounds that it can backfire and make matters worse rather than better. A church that was constantly throwing itself into domestic partisan politics would lose some of the very moral authority that gives it power in the first place. So the United States is going to help the Vatican maintain its quote-unquote moral power, its moral authority in the world, to be the judge of every nation, a role which belongs to Christ and Christ only. All right? I hope my listeners are following this. He says, nonetheless, my job was to push, if just a little, and that is what I tried to do, says Rooney. Usually, we spoke with the Vatican about our mutual interests and hopes for Latin America in general terms, but occasionally we went to them with a specific issue. In the case of Nicaragua, for example, we raised our concerns about Cardinal Miguel Obando Bravo, the longtime Archbishop of Managua. This once stalwart anti-Sandinista of the 1980s began behaving strangely after his retirement in March of 2005. Okay, he retired as a cardinal from the Roman Catholic Church, and that retirement led to a philosophical or political or even a religious change. In other words, this guy starts acting weird from the Vatican's point of view. He says by the fall of 2006, he was publicly declaring his support for Daniel Ortega, the one-time Marxist guerrilla and former leader of the Sandinistas, who was now campaigning against the presidency of, again, he was campaigning again for the presidency of Nicaragua. In a blatant effort to win votes in a country where 60% of the population identified as Catholic, Ortega was aligning himself with the 80-year-old cardinal, and Obando Bravo, incredibly, was obliging, going so far as to appear in campaign advertisements with Ortega. Isn't it funny? To maintain the 501c3 tax-exempt status, the churches in this country have to stay out of politics. They can't use the pulpit of the churches as a bully pulpit to promote religion, or rather politics, partisan politics, one side or the other. But Roman Catholic bishops and cardinals are publicly active in politics, both in this country and South America. This is more evidence. Why doesn't the Roman Catholic Church lose its 501c3? It's exempt. The Holy See, by its very existence, demands to be the political and spiritual leader of the world, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That's why you see Roman Catholics on television, Roman Catholic priests and prelates, and even lay people advocating for every political concern. They are principally organized to influence in politics. And the question must be asked, how in the world, that being the case, how in the world does the Roman Catholic Church maintain its 501c3 tax-exempt status? It ought to be a glaring example of contradiction in this country, where all but the Roman Catholic Church must abstain from political activism and preaching of politics from the pulpits. But the Roman Catholic Church is free to do so. Public politicking. Now it says various rumors were circulating to supply a reason for the cardinal's conversion, but regardless of the explanation, it threatened to help Ortega achieve victory. We hoped the Vatican could convince Obando Bravo to return to his senses. Okay, so the United States approaching the Vatican, wanting the Vatican to put a stop to Obando Bravo's politicking. And the Vatican, it's principally a political organization. Now, so if anything's going to be done, it's going to have to be the United States to do it. Take the heat off of the Vatican. It says one interesting twist in this episode, FR, that's the abbreviation for father. I just refuse to call these people by the title that they expect. The Bible prohibits it, and he's no father to me. He's no father of any children, not any legitimate children, but nonetheless, these Roman Catholic priests insist on being called father, so I will call them Fr. Ernesto Cardinal. He says one interesting twist in this episode, Fr. Ernesto Cardinal, the priest and former minister of culture at whom John Paul II had wagged his finger more than 20 years earlier, now spoke out against Ortega for making, quote, a false and hypocritical use of religion, unquote. That defines the whole Roman Catholic Church. Look, a false and hypocritical use of religion? Isn't this the pot calling the kettle black? To perpetrate, quote, one more of his charades, unquote. As Cardinal Obando Bravo let himself get dragged into the Sandinista mantra, Fr. Cardinal extricated himself from it. Just typical Rome taking both sides of every issue. I mean, maybe it's time for me to read the Jesuit oath again. But Rome is always on both sides of every issue, so as to control the change that results from the issue. He says the church's control over a retired cardinal is limited, says this author. The Holy See was reluctant to publicly reprimand Obando Bravo, but it did ask him to step out of Ortega's campaign, his political campaign. Church officials also asked him to fly to Rome for a sit-down discussion about his role in Nicaraguan politics. The cardinal declined. As we look to the Holy See for support on certain issues, the church sometimes sought support from us. One notable example of this came in the spring of 2006 when I met with Cardinal Juan Sandoval Iniquez, the Archbishop of Guadalajara. Although the meeting was not particularly noteworthy in itself, it received undue press attention in Mexico some years later due to WikiLeaks. Cardinal Sandoval was in Rome that spring to attend a meeting of the Sacred College of Cardinals, in this case of cardinals from Latin America. These gatherings were occasions for non-curial cardinals to come to Rome and meet each other and the Pope. On March 28th, I met with Cardinal Sandoval in a conference room inside the Vatican. The Cardinal told us that he was concerned about the quote-unquote dangerous trend, as our cable later paraphrased his comments, of leftist leaders in Latin America. Quite correctly, perhaps, the Cardinal said that, quote, the poor in Latin America do not understand the potential benefits that a free market could bring, unquote. At that time, the former mayor of Mexico City, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, was running for the presidency of Mexico as the Party of Democratic Revolution candidate and had a good chance to win. His record as mayor of Mexico City was poor, according to the Cardinal, marred by rising crime and violence. Cardinal Sandoval, quote, asked whether President Bush could help, unquote, as our cable phrased it. 6 years later, when this cable was made public in the WikiLeaks disclosures, the press, unsurprisingly, gave it a sensational spin. Quote, ex-Juarez bishop worked to sway Mexican election, unquote, ran one typical headline. The leak brought a great deal of unwanted attention to the Cardinal, which only distracted from his legitimate concerns regarding a victory by the PRD candidate. The Cardinal had hardly been alone in expressing his concerns. Other sources in Mexico contacted the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City to deliver the same message and solicit American assistance. The Cardinal just had the misfortune to suffer from the WikiLeaks security breach. Holy See U.S. diplomacy, this is what this book is all about. Holy See U.S. diplomacy is generally more nuanced and less tactical than the above episodes might suggest. Dialogue with the Holy See affords the United States an avenue for the moderate and careful exchange of information and opinion without necessarily an accompanying expectation of a specific result or time. This distinguishes diplomacy with the Holy See from what goes on at other bilateral missions. Okay? Again, a demonstration that the Vatican remains somewhat aloof while cooperative second and third parties do the muscle work. And that is the bilateral commissions. Okay? See, the Vatican has just limitless think tanks and knighthoods and secret societies that permeate all of society in every nation that do the heavy lifting for the papacy. And one of those is the United States government, okay? The biggest and most powerful and most important to the Vatican, obviously. Now, he says meetings with officials in the Curia or Secretary of State's office often involved a wide variety of subjects or issues, whether broad policy or political trends or specific current events. Lost in the media's fixation on power plays inside the Vatican is the fact that leadership positions in the church are generally filled by extremely well-educated and cosmopolitan men who speak several languages and are very well informed on world events. Okay? So the Vatican surrounds itself with the most astute, well-educated, and worldly men in existence. Okay? It's politics, world control, world influence, and it uses the right people for that job. Now, unlike most bilateral commissions, which cover country-specific issues pertaining to U.S. interests, the Holy See mission routinely deals with core issues like religious freedom, human rights, transparency of its leaders, and corruption as these arise in all parts of the world. To grasp the breadth of the Holy See's realm of interest, consider that when President Bush met with the Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone, in June of 2007, they conferred about ongoing issues in more than 15 countries around the world. Typical of the professionalism, experience, and wide-ranging knowledge in the Vatican Secretary of State is Archbishop Pietro Parolin, currently Papal Nuncio to Venezuela, and effective October 15, 2013, the Secretary of State of the Holy See. When I served in Rome, Parolin was the Undersecretary for Relations between States, which made him second in command of the second section of our principal interlocutor. Fluent in 4 languages and conversant on every region of the globe, he would articulate the Holy See's position clearly and candidly, but always with consummate professionalism. I went to see Monsignor Parolin at the Apostolic Palace one morning in mid-March to ask the Vatican to support the United States-backed candidates in the upcoming elections at the United Nations. Okay? Seeking Vatican help to put American politicians in the United Nations, which is the global governing body for the papacy. Wants Vatican help to get certain people elected in the United Nations. Is that okay with you? I want to ask my listeners, is it okay with you that the United States solicits help from the Vatican, the man of sin, the son of perdition, to get elected certain people from the United States to sit on the Vatican governing body, the United Nations? What about American sovereignty? What about the Constitution? Do you get it? He says, I went to see Monsignor Parolin, the most knowledgeable, cosmopolitan, well-educated, multilingual Secretary of State to help him get the Vatican to support certain U.S.-backed candidates in the upcoming election at the United Nations. Even our representatives to the United Nations are picked by the Vatican. Do you think that's okay? We'll be back right after the messages.
I pledge allegiance to the King of Kings and to his kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. One holy nation, under Heavenly Father, grace, mercy, justice for all.
If you'd like to get a copy of this program, you may subscribe at FirstAmendmentRadio.com for only $45 a month, and you'll receive an MP3 CD weekly of all of our programs. As a bonus, we'll send you a password for our audio archives online. That's a $15 value. Or you may request any month of any program on one MP3 CD for a minimum donation of only $25, or any single program on tape, MP3 CD, or CD for only $15. You may do all of this online at FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Just follow the instructions to make a donation or subscribe. You may also adopt an hour of your favorite program. Please don't forget that most of the programs on FirstAmendmentRadio.com are listener-supported. Don't do internet? Then call 559-781-3773 and we'll be honored to help you. Thank you from all of us here at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Back from the break, you're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. And if you'd like to hear Inquisition Update continue, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. And if you'd like to contact me, please do so directly by email. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. That's tom@seawaves.us. Now, most Americans wouldn't see anything controversial, difficult, or disconcerting, or negative at all in this previous sentence that I read before the break. I think my listeners ought to be outraged. This ambassador to the Holy See says, I went to Monsignor Parole, and this is the representative of the United States government. The man who speaks for you to the Holy See. He says, I went to see Monsignor Parole at the Apostolic Palace one morning in mid-March to ask the Vatican to support the U.S.-backed candidates in the upcoming elections at the United Nations. The Vatican gets to vet the representatives of the United States to the United Nations. Obviously, if the Pope's going to just support U.S.-backed candidates, the Pope gets to vet them, doesn't he? Approve them for service? Or disapprove them, as the case may be? Is that okay with you, citizen of the United States? Let me ask my listeners a question. Where's Jesus in all this? Well, this book isn't about Jesus. The Roman Catholic Church isn't about Jesus, and neither is the government of the United States. It's all about the papacy, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the Antichrist of the Bible. What loyalty, what legitimate loyalty do you have to a government that denies Christ and places all of its emphasis on the Antichrist of the Bible? You beginning to believe that you're a citizen of the wrong kingdom? That's my assessment. I'm a citizen of the wrong kingdom. I profess Jesus with my mouth, and I profess to be a citizen of his holy and eternal kingdom, and yet I hold in my hand citizenship to the United States of America, a government that has rejected Christ, does not consider Christ in its dealings, either internally, foreign, or domestic. It's an anti-Christ government. And I renounce my citizenship to this unholy papal government. That's right, I did it publicly. And you heard it, you witnessed it. Now I serve but one master. He says, I went to see Monsignor Parolin at the Apostolic Palace one morning. Can you imagine a palace being named after the apostles? A Roman Catholic palace? He says, I went to see Monsignor Parolin at the Apostolic Palace one morning in mid-March. You talk about blasphemy. To ask the Vatican to support the U.S.-backed candidates in the upcoming elections at the United Nations. As so often happened in such meetings, though, the conversation turned to other matters and regions, including China, Lebanon, which would be at war by the end of the summer, India, and Iran. See, he reigns over the kings of the earth. All of them. The Pope busies himself with all the governments of the world. He says a week earlier, the United States had signed a significant agreement on nuclear weapons with India, essentially recognizing India's status as a nuclear partner, despite the fact that it had never signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968, and thus allowing the United States to sell nuclear materials to India. The Bush administration viewed the new rules and restrictions of the agreements as a means of drawing India more closer in line with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Vatican took a less favorable view. As I later reported to the State Department, Monsignor Parolin believed, as a matter of fact, I just want you to know, India has been a mission for the Vatican forever, and especially since the creation of the Jesuit order. Rome has a lot of influence in India. That's why India has been welcomed into the nuclear College of Nations. Okay. It says the Bush administration viewed the new rules and restrictions of the agreement as a means of drawing India more closely in line with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Vatican took a less favorable view. As I later reported to the State Department, Monsignor Parolin believed the agreement sent the quote-unquote wrong signal at a time when we were trying to get Iran to halt its nuclear, that is, Iran, to halt its nuclear program, and that reacting aggressively to Iran's ambitions while nurturing India's would only alienate Iran and foreclose the possibility of further dialogue. See, Iran's being singled out here because Iran harbors the quote-unquote radical fundamentalist Islamists that are a threat to the world, so they say. And, of course, we need a boogeyman in the Middle East because the Pope needs to be involved in the political theater in the Middle East in order to soften the ground and embellish the stage for his final phony futurist fulfillment, supposed fulfillment of Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. So we've got to get these radical fundamentalist Islamists out of there that might be a threat to the Pope, should he reign from Mount Moriah in Jerusalem someday. And the United States is doing this simply by putting heat on Iran through supporting a nuclear proliferation in India. India and Iran are constantly at odds. So the United States, acting on behalf of the Vatican, is turning up the heat in the Middle East to provoke a situation that justifies more papal and U.S. military, U.S. diplomatic, U.S. economic, and every other kind of influence in the Middle East. He says what the Monsignor did not say in this meeting was that the Vatican was itself poised to facilitate a dialogue between the Western powers and Iran. So if Iran's going to negotiate, Rome wants to be right in the middle of it. The Vatican, the man of sin, wants to be the mediator, the great peacemaker. And when in fact it's the Vatican that has turned up the heat on Iran through the United States. George Bush was simply doing what he was told in granting India nuclear material. Now he says, what the Monsignor did not say in this meeting was that the Vatican was itself poised to facilitate a dialogue between the Western powers, that is, Roman Catholic powers, and Iran. He says, as we had put it in an embassy cable to the State Department a few weeks earlier, the Holy See's relationship to Iran was, quote, an East-West and Christian-Muslim link that could present an opportunity for dialogue and leverage, unquote. Okay, so we've got this big Hegelian dialectic. The papacy wants change, wants to be in the center of the dialogue, wants to be a harmless hosting third party for discussions, but you can bet Rome's going to control both sides of the controversy. It says the Holy See and Iran enjoyed a long and mostly amicable history. They had recently celebrated the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations. Did you know Iran has diplomatic relations with the Vatican? Of course they do. Every government on the planet has diplomatic relations with the Vatican, and those that resist that are the ones that are made controversial in the world in order to seek change, regime change, more favorable representation at the Vatican. Okay, the Pope insists on reigning over the kings of the earth. He said they had recently celebrated a 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations. People in the Vatican could still remember a more tolerant Iran. Prior to the Islamic Revolution, the country had been known for its inclusive perspective on religion, with Jews and Christians serving alongside Muslims in the majlis. There are even today some vestiges of Zoroastrianism in the country, some 1,400 years after Islam superseded it in ancient Persia. Now, let me explain something else. The Roman Catholic Church calls itself the Catholic Church. Catholic means universal. And the religion that Rome has cultivated over the last 1,800 years is a religion that appeals, that has the basic elements of every pagan religion. Okay? It comprises elements of Zoroastrianism, of every pagan religion. It even appeals to the Muslims with the Fatima apparition. Okay? This is named after one of Muhammad's daughters, Fatima, if that's how you want to pronounce it. It's not a Christian religion. It's a Babylonian religion. Remember the ancient Roman Empire, before the rise of the Antichrist and the Holy Roman Empire, Rome was simply a warehouse. I mean, there was every religion in the Roman Empire. They worshipped every god. And you see the ruins of anytime you look at a tourist brochure of Rome, they always depict the ruins of the ancient religious temples and idols and images that literally defined the ancient Roman Empire. And the only thing the papacy did when it took it over was just simply lump Christianity in with it. It's an eclectic religion. It's a syncretism of every error known to man. And Christianity is believed to be the principal religion of this Roman Catholic Church when they make a ritual of slaying Christ on every altar of the Roman Catholic Church during the Mass. I mean, if you look objectively at the Roman Catholic Church and compare it with Scripture, you can only come to one conclusion. They have completely turned Christianity on its head. And that it is still regarded in the world as a Christian religion defies common sense. All right? So the Pope wants to be the religious leader of every cult on the planet. So common sense dictates the only religion that he will not be the head of is that over which Christ rules. True Bible-believing Christians, we're not going to be a part of this ecumenical, global religion. It's a religious hobo stew that encompasses the whole world. The whole world has turned in rejection to Christ and the Bible. And even those churches that were once Protestant don't even know what it is to be Protestant, to protest the Antichrist. So if you hold fast to Christ and Him alone, you are in an extreme minority in this world. He says, a few weeks after that meeting with Monsignor Parolin, I had the opportunity to visit with Cardinal Jean-Louis Théron, the man who had once held Monsignor Parolin's position as Undersecretary for Relations Between States. A native of Bordeaux, France, Cardinal Théron had gone on to become the number one of the second section, the Secretary for Relations Between States. He's one of the most respected, admired, and important diplomatic figures in the Vatican. He was librarian of the Holy Roman Church when I first met him. In 2007, my last full year in Rome, Pope Benedict named him as president of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue. Okay? He's the chief ecumenist of the Vatican, uniting all the religions of the world. He says the main body of the Catholic Church that interacts with other religions. Even before taking on the Holy See's program for interreligious dialogue, Cardinal Théron was a leading Vatican expert on Islam. He brought calm, intelligence, and a broad experience to the subject, demonstrating a neighborly friendliness to the religion of Muhammad, but firmly opposed to fundamentalists. He's not opposed to Muhammad, he's not opposed to Islam, but only to the fundamentalists. That should be a familiar word to Bible-believing Christians. He's only opposed to fundamentalists who favored violence over dialogue. Okay? So they're after the fundamentalists who favor violence over dialogue. Now, the Pope's going to run up against the problem, if he's going to use fundamentalism to demonize Bible-believing Christians. We're not violent. There are violent sects, no doubt. I've heard some of them ranting and raving, but we're not violent. Christ is king. He wields the sword, and we wield a sword, but it is the sword of the Spirit, the Word of God. Okay? It cuts both directions, left and right. It doesn't draw a drop of blood. It only applies the blood. Okay? That's Bible-believing Christians. That's true Protestant Christianity. But they're tagging the term fundamentalists, and have been tagging the term fundamentalists on us for decades and decades, and linking the word fundamentalism with radical, violent extremists. And I've been called more than once, as you might well imagine, a radical, violent extremist. And I couldn't whip my way out of a wet paper bag. But except for the sword of the Spirit, the Word of God. They're eventually going to call me a domestic terrorist, a hater, a threat. Because there's no greater weapon against error than the truth. And that truth is Jesus Christ and His Bible. The true church of Jesus Christ must constantly stand opposed to the counterfeit church, the Antichrist church, the Church of Rome, and all of her ecumenical evangelibellies that have signed league with her. Okay? Now back to the book. He says, Cardinal Turan's view was not that all religions were created equal, but that all religions, quote, which are seeking God must be respected because they have the same dignity, unquote. More Pope speak, right? In other words, we don't have to agree about who or what we worship, but we have to agree to disagree civilly. The papacy has been trying to promote itself from its very inception as the representative of Jesus Christ on the earth. You know what the papacy's been drugged down to? Being the representative of every pagan religion on the planet. What a weak counterfeit for Christ. It shouldn't deceive anybody, but it has deceived the whole world. I'll tell you what, Roman Catholics aren't deceived. They're looking at these current string of liberal popes in the Roman Catholic Church as having completely destroyed the store, completely destroyed the credibility of the Roman Catholic Church. They've repudiated the Council of Trent. They've repudiated and embraced. They've repudiated Roman Catholicism. They've repudiated Christianity, and now embrace every error known to man. Some Catholics are beginning to wake up and smell the coffee. They're beginning to comprehend that something is terribly wrong at the highest echelons of the Roman Catholic Church. But they're stuck in the belief that this is the church that Jesus founded, and that Peter was the first pope, and that it will prevail until Christ returns. They see it as the one true church. They've been indoctrinated with that from cradle to grave, and they look at everything else as error. And they simply don't know what to do about it. Well, I know what to do about it, but I'm afraid they won't listen to me. He says Cardinal Turan had been one of the Vatican's harshest critics of the war in Iraq, condemning it as a, quote, crime against peace, unquote, among other epithets. Though the fate of Iraq was the subject that still preoccupied him, he bore no ill will toward the United States. To convey the nature of pre-Saddam Iraq and give a sense of perspective, he told me that there had once been a robust middle class whose constituents were well educated and earned a per capita income of around 3,000 euros, equal or greater to Spain at the time. In the pre-Saddam Iraq, it was said that, quote, books are written in Egypt, printed in Lebanon, and read in Iraq, unquote, the Cardinal told me in English as we sat at his office in the Vatican. Iraqis were historically a highly literate population, at least until Saddam came in and destroyed the educated middle class. Now, Cardinal Turan, like the Patriarch Delhi and Archbishop Yelda, worried that the war would destroy the Christian minority. Once the Americans left, the Kurds would take care of themselves in the north, while the Shiites and Sunnis would fight for the spoils to the south. As for the Christians, they would be shut out of power completely, their rights vaporized. The central problem in Islam, in Cardinal Turan's view, was its failure to acknowledge the right of non-Muslims to exist. What sense was there in a dialogue if the other side believes it had nothing to learn from you, that you are an infidel? I could hear in Cardinal Turan's words a marked change in the Vatican's line on Islam. You know, if you're a regular listener to Inquisition Update, you know that virtually every book that we've read on this program by as many authors as there are titles lists the historical accounts, innumerable historical accounts, where the Roman Catholic Church committed genocide against Bible-believing Christians. And yet it dares to say that Islam is intolerant of other religions. But it does say that publicly, and the world, being completely ignorant of the history of the Roman Catholic Church, sees the Vatican as a great stabilizer in the world. It's unbelievable, the deception that has been perpetrated on the world's people and their incapability to come to the truth about it. He said the central problem of Islam, in Cardinal Turan's view, was its failure to acknowledge the right of non-Muslims to exist. What sense was there in a dialogue if the other side believed it had nothing to learn from you, that you were an infidel? Infidel, that's what they call Bible-believing Christians throughout the entire history of the Roman Catholic Church. He said, I could hear in Cardinal Turan's words a marked change in the Vatican's line on Islam. We had picked up on this in conversations with the Curia in recent months, especially following the outbursts surrounding the republication of the Muhammad cartoons in February, and we suspected that it was a coordinated message. On April 20th, we sent a cable to the State Department entitled Vatican Hardening Line on Islam, unquote. Is that why the United States has hardened the line on Islam? He said among his other concerns about Islam, Cardinal Turan, like others in the Holy See, lamented the lack of quote-unquote reciprocity, a precondition for real dialogue and understanding. Why should it be that Western countries and cities, including Rome, welcome mosques and institutions of all faiths, while Christian churches are prohibited or severely limited in many Muslim nations? In the Vatican's own backyard, the Saudis had contributed tens of millions of dollars to build in Rome the largest mosque in Western Europe. As we informed the State Department, quote, the Vatican is demanding greater protection for Christians and greater freedom for religious expression, unquote. This description of the new Vatican tone turned out to be an accurate indication of where Pope Benedict XVI was headed. What direction is that? A global religion. A union of every religion. In the name of seeking God by whatever name, whatever tradition, whatever ritual, and to do it under the authority of one man, the papacy, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the Antichrist of the Bible. When will America and the world wake up to the Protestant reality? That's all the time we have for today. We'll continue with our reading and discussion of the book, The Global Vatican, by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney, tomorrow on Inquisition Update.